Hello, my lovely friends. It's Emma here from A Vintage Girl in a Modern World. Now, this is not the episode I thought I'd be making today. And when I heard that Dolly Parton had passed away, I did what I think many of us did. I stared at the words and waited for them to stop being true. And Dolly passed away peacefully in Nashville on the 25th of August, and she was 80 years old. And 80 years is a long life, and yet somehow it did not feel long enough for Dolly. And perhaps that's because she never seemed to belong to one particular age. She was a little girl from the Smoky Mountains, the young woman standing beside Porter Wagoner, and the movie star marching through an office in 9 to 5, and the wise, funny woman in rhinestones who seemed as though she'd always been here. And I knew I loved her. I simply don't think I understood how comforting it was to know she was still in the world, until suddenly she wasn't. And it felt as though a light had gone out. Not only because of the voice, the song, or the films, but because Dolly represented something reassuring. She made kindness look strong, and she made femininity look powerful. And she built an entire public image out of wig sequins and glorious exaggeration, while remaining one of the sharpest minds in any room she entered, which is quite an achievement when your hair has usually entered the room several seconds before you. And for my Elvis channel, I told the story of I Always Love You, and the recording Elvis never made. But Dolly's life was far bigger than any one song, or anyone almost recording. So today, I want to remember the whole woman. The daughter, sister, wife, songwriter, actress, businesswoman. The vintage style icon, whose wardrobe deserves its own postcode. And the human being who made millions of strangers feel strangely close to her. So, pop the kettle on, get yourselves comfortable. And let's remember the beautiful Dolly Parton. Before the rhinestones, the wigs, and the enormous stages, there was a one-bedroom home in the mountains of East Tennessee. Dolly Rebecca Parton was born on the 19th of January, 1946, in Sevier County, the fourth of 12 children, born to Evie Lee and Robert Lee Parton. And the family had very little money. Their home had no electricity or running water, but it was filled with children's stories, faith and music. And Dolly's mother sang old ballads and church songs, and her father worked hard to provide for the family and was, by Dolly's account, one of the cleverest men she ever knew, despite never having to learn to read or write. And that detail would remain quietly important for the rest of her life. And Dolly began making songs at 5 years old. Her first was about a little doll made from a corn cob, named Tiny Tasseltop. And because Dolly could not write the words down herself, her mother wrote them for her. And I love that image. A tiny child singing a song into the room, while her mother catches the words on paper before they can disappear. It feels like the beginning of everything. Her uncle, Bill Owens, recognised that the child had something extraordinary, so he encouraged her, helped her reach Nashville, and treated her as a talent as something worth taking seriously. And by 10, Dolly was appearing on local radio and television. And at 13, she had made her debut at the Grand Ole Opry. And picture her standing there for a moment. A child from a crowded mountain home, stepping into country music's most famous circle. And she could not have known how many times the world would eventually circle back to her. And the poverty of Dolly's childhood was real. But she never allowed it to be told as though the family had been emptied of everything that mattered. And that is why the coat of many colours still reaches people so deeply. Her mother had made a coat from scraps of fabric and told Dolly the biblical story of Joseph. And Dolly wore it proudly to school, only to be mocked by other children. And in the song, she does not pretend the teasing did not hurt, but she transforms that hurt by returning to what her mother gave her, love stitched into every piece. And that was one of Dolly's greatest gifts as a writer. She did not erase hardship. She found dignity inside it. And that little mountain home was crowded, cold and poor. But in Dolly's memory, it was also so alive with voices. And she spent the rest of her life carrying those voices with her. The morning after graduating from high school in 1964, Dolly left for Nashville. She was 18, determined, and carrying the sort of certainty which can look like madness to everybody else except for the person who has it. And on her first day in the city, she met Carl Dean. And there's something so wonderfully Dolly about that. She arrived to begin the great love affair of her professional life, and immediately met the great love of her private one. And Carl was almost opposite of the world she was entering. He did not want fame. He did not enjoy public attention. And he had no desire to become Mr. Dolly Parton for the cameras. And they married in 1966 and remained married for 59 years, until Carl's death in March 2025. And for decades his absence from red carpet created all sorts of rumours. People sometimes find an perfectly ordinary private marriage rather suspicious, when celebrity has trained them to expect a photograph every 6 minutes. But privacy appeared to be part of what protected them. And while Dolly belonged to audiences around the world, Carl gave her somewhere she didn't have to perform being Dolly. And they travelled in the motorhome, stayed in roadside motels, visited drive-through restaurants, and returned to the little church where they had married for anniversary picnics. And I think that contrast tells us something important about her. The grander the public image became, the more she seemed to value the ordinary life beneath it. And in Nashville, success did not arrive immediately. Dolly wrote songs for other performers and tried to persuade the music business to hear what she already knew was there. And record executives initially wanted to market her as a pop singer. But Dolly knew her voice belonged to country music, and she was not ashamed of the mountains in her accent. She understood that the very thing that some people might consider too rural was her source of originality. And then, in 1967, a telephone call come from the Porter Wagoner show, and the door she had been waiting for finally opened. Porter Wagoner gave Dolly a national audience. She joined his television programme in 1967, replacing the popular singer Norma Jean. And at first, some viewers resisted her. They had loved the woman who came before, and were not quite ready for a tiny blonde whirlwind in rhinestones to rearrange the furniture. But Dolly kept appearing, kept singing, and eventually won them over by being completely herself. And she and Porter became one of country music's best-known partnerships. And they recorded successful duets, toured together, and created an on-screen chemistry that audiences adored. And Porter was a mentor, producer, and an important part of the road that carried her into national fame. And Dolly never denied that. But gratitude can become complicated when somebody begins to believe the door they opened gives them ownership of the person who walked through it. And Dolly had always intended to build a solo career. And as her confidence and success grew, so did the tension between them. Porter did not want her to leave, and Dolly knew she had to. And I think this is why one reason so many women recognised themselves in her story. She loved and appreciated someone who had helped her, while understanding that she could not remain inside the version of her life which suited him. And I think those two truths can exist together. Because leaving does not always mean that love has disappeared. Sometimes it means the person has finally understood that gratitude is not a life sentence. And when conversations failed, Dolly did what she had done since she was 5. She wrote a song. And I Will Always Love You was her goodbye to Porter. And there's no punishment in it, no attempt to humiliate him. She honours what he gave her and still walks away. And when she sang it to him, Porter cried. And the song became a #1 country hit for Dolly in 1974. And again when she re-recorded it for the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas in 1982. And years later, Whitney Houston's extraordinary recording would carry Dolly's words across the entire world. But the first great act contained inside that song was quieter. Dolly protected her right to leave, without pretending she had never loved the person she was leaving behind. Before Dolly's appearance was so memorable, people sometimes behaved as though the songs had simply arrived to decorate it. But in truth, the image was decoration around one of the most gifted storytellers country music had ever produced. And Dolly wrote thousands of songs across her life, and she could write about desire, poverty, jealousy, faith, work, motherhood, heartbreak and home. In a language often so simple that you didn't notice how carefully it had been constructed. And that is much harder than sounding clever. Because anybody can make an idea complicated. But I think it takes real intelligence to make a complicated feeling sound as though it has always belonged to everybody. And I think Jolene is a perfect example. The song is built around fear, but Dolly refuses to turn the other woman into a villain. And she recognises her beauty, and she admits her own vulnerability, and she asks rather than attacks. And psychologically, that is what makes it so gripping. The danger is not simply Jolene. It's that terrible feeling that somebody else possesses something you cannot compete with. And then there is 9 to 5, a song so rhythmically perfect that Dolly created its typewriter sound by clicking her acrylic nails together. Naturally, even a manicure has a publishing credit to Anne. And the song is funny, furious, and immediately recognisable to anybody whose working life is a rich somebody sitting several floors above them. But Dolly could make social criticism dance. And she wrote women as full human beings, not merely as saints, seductresses, or somebody waiting for a man to complete the chorus. Her woman could be frightened and determined, loving and ambitious, glamorous and practical at exactly the same time, rather like Dolly herself. In 1980, Dolly made her film debut in 9 to 5 beside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. And it's difficult now to imagine that film without her. And Dora Lee Rhodes arrives in the office, looking exactly as everybody expects Dolly Parton to look, and spends the rest of the story exposing how little appearance tells us about intelligence or character. And the men around Dora Lee assume she is available because she is beautiful and feminine. And the women misunderstand her because of the rumours created by their boss. And Dora Lee had to survive everybody else's projection before she is allowed to be herself. And Dolly understood that experience perfectly. She had spent years allowing people to see the hair and the figure first, while quietly remembering everything they revealed once they assumed she could not follow the conversation. And honestly, I do admire the efficiency of turning other people's prejudices into free business information. And Dolly was a natural screen presence. She did not seem to be straining for a performance, and her warmth travelled through the camera. And the title song went to #1 and won 2 Grammy Awards, while also receiving an Academy Award nomination. When more films followed, she played Mona Strangley in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, Jake Farris in Rhinestone, and Truvy Jones in Still Magnolias. And Truvy's beauty salon is one of those places in cinema I could happily move into. The hairdryers hum, the women talk, and Dolly presides over it all, and perfectly arranged curls, and enough warmth to make everybody feel safe. And in Still Magnolias, humour and grief sit beside one another, exactly as they do in real life, and Dolly understood both. She knew laughter was not a denial of pain. Sometimes it's how people make enough room to survive it. And her films gave us heightened, colourful words. But the feeling inside her performances were always human. Now, we do need to discuss the wardrobe, because I think it would be disrespectful not to. And Dolly understood clothing as storytelling. The high hair, bright colours, fitted silhouettes, lace, fringe, and rhinestones were not accidents. And they certainly were not evidence that she lacked taste. They were a deliberate visual language. And as a child, Dolly had admired a glamorous local woman whom other people had dismissed. And where they saw access, Dolly saw beauty. And she built that image from that memory and never apologised for it. And her long-term designers, beginning with Lucy Adams in the late 1960s, helped translate that vision into clothes which could only belong to Dolly. And the dresses were often constructed with enormous skill, shaped, beaded, and balanced to create an instantly recognisable silhouette. And she did not dress to disappear politely into a room, and thank goodness for that, because modern life already contains quite enough beige, in my opinion. And what I love most is that Dolly's femininity never seemed to ask permission from anybody. She enjoyed beauty, makeup, long nails and extravagant clothes, without accepting the idea that these things made her less serious. And there's something quietly radical on that, because women are still encouraged to improve intelligence by distancing themselves from anything considered too feminine. And Dolly refused the bargain. She could arrive dressed like a chandelier, own the building, write the song, and leave for the publishing rights. And the joke was never really on Dolly. She was usually telling it. By the mid-1980s, Dolly had achieved the sort of success which could have carried her permanently away from East Tennessee. But instead she took part of that success home. And in 1986, she joined the Hershey family in transforming Silver Dolly City into Dollywood. And it became one of Tennessee's best-known attractions and an important source of employment in the region where she grew up. And that matters, because Dolly did not romanticize poverty by suggesting love was all anybody needed. She understood that people also need work, opportunity, and reasons for their children to remain near home if they choose. And Dollywood celebrated the music, crafts, stories, and landscape of the Smoky Mountains. But it was not simply a monument to Dolly. It was a way of allowing her success to circulate through the place to help create it. And there was even a replica of her childhood mountain home. And visitors can look at the small rooms and imagine 12 children living inside them. Yet, Dolly never presented the house as a museum of misery. She spoke of what it lacked and what it held. And I think that balance ran through everything she did. She could remember hunger without allowing it to swallow the memory of her mother singing. And she could become globally famous without treating her home as somewhere she had escaped from in embarrassment. And the little girl left the mountains to find the world, then returned with something for the mountains in her hands. Of all Dolly's achievements, the Imagination Library may reveal her heart most clearly. Her father never learnt to read or write, and Dolly knew how intelligent he was, and understood the shame and limitation illiteracy could place around a person who deserved far more opportunity. And in 1995, she created the Imagination Library in her home county, and the idea was beautifully simple. Children from birth to the age of 5 would receive a carefully chosen book through the post every month, regardless of the family's income. And imagine being a little child and seeing a parcel arrive with your name on it. And you open it, and a new world is waiting inside. And the programme expanded far beyond Tennessee into counties, including the UK, and went on to send hundreds of millions of books to children. And Dolly often said her father was the proudest of the Imagination Library. And I find that deeply moving. The man who could not read watched his daughters place books into the hands of children he would never meet. And she did not turn his difficulty into something shameful. She turned it into a door for somebody else. And that is humanitarianism at its most meaningful. No generosity performed for applause, but an old family wound transformed into protection for future children. The rhinestones caught the light, but the books carried it further. For nearly 60 years, Carl Dean remained the private centre of Dolly's very public life. And she told funny stories about him, wrote songs inspired by him, and protected the part of their marriage which did not belong to the audience. And he died on the 3rd of March 2025 at the age of 82. And afterwards, Dolly spoke openly about how deeply she missed him. And there are losses which alter the shape of ordinary time, and the person is absent not only from the grand occasions, but from the chair, the journey, the private joke, and the end of an ordinary day. And for somebody whose life had been lived before millions of people, Carl had been the witness who knew the woman before the image became global. He met the 18-year-old newcomer, not the icon. And when Dolly passed away less than 18 months after him, many people, including myself, have found comfort in imagining them together again. Not beneath stage lights, not at an awards ceremony, but perhaps somewhere quiet, where no cameras, no schedule, and absolutely no requirement for Carl to attend a red carpet. By the end of her life, Dolly had sold more than 100 million records and received honours far beyond country music. And she belonged to the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Songwriters Hall of Fame, And after initially expressing doubt that she belonged there, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, naturally she responded by making a rock album. If Dolly was going to accept the invitation, she was not arriving without doing the homework. But lists of awards cannot explain why people loved her. Plenty of talented people were admired, and Dolly was cherished. And part of that came from humour. She could make the joke about herself before anybody else reached it, which meant the joke never reduced her. And part came from emotional intelligence. She knew when to be playful, when to be direct, and when somebody needed kindness more than advice. And part came from consistency. Across decades of change in fashion, politics, and celebrity culture, Dolly remained recognisably Dolly. She could speak to people who disagreed with one another, because she rarely treated kindness as a reward reserved for the correct side. And that did not make her empty or without conviction. It made her unusually skilled at remembering the human beneath the argument. And in a modern world which seems determined to turn every difference into a battlefield, that quality almost feels vintage in the loveliest possible way. When I began writing this tribute, I wondered how anybody could fit Dolly into one episode. And the truth is, you cannot. There are too many songs, too many dresses, too many films, stories, acts of generosity, and perfectly timed one-liners. But perhaps the tribute does not have to contain an entire life. Perhaps it only has to say what that life meant to us. And Dolly belonged to my vintage world, long before I understood the scale of what she had built. She stood there in soft colours, country television stages, in the enormous hair and embroidered dresses, in 9 to 5, Still Magnolias, and the songs which seemed to have always existed. She made my world feel warmer, and that is the part I am struggling with now. And until this week, Dolly belonged to the present. We could still wonder what she might say next, what she might record, or which perfectly outrageous dress might appear when she walked onto a stage. And now we've been asked to speak about her in the past, and I don't think my heart has quite caught up with that yet. But when I look across her life, I do not see only loss. I see a little girl in a mountain home, discovering that words could carry her further than any road she knew. I see a young woman leaving somebody she loved because she understood she also had to belong to herself. And I see an actress making us laugh, a businesswoman bringing work home, and a daughter honouring her father by sending books to children around the world. I see a woman who took every assumption made about her. Too poor, too country, too blonde, too feminine, too much, and turned it into part of her strength. And Dolly never made herself smaller to help the world understand her. She simply gave the world time to catch up. And still, beneath everything she achieved, she never seemed to forget the small house, the family voices, or the mountains waiting behind her. And that is why I do not want to leave this tribute in only sadness. I want to leave it with gratitude. Thank you, Dolly, for the songs which found words for feelings we could not explain. And thank you for Doralee and Truvy, for every rhinestone, butterfly, and gloriously unnecessary inch of hair. And thank you for showing women that softness and strength were never opposites. And thank you for the jobs you brought home, the books she placed into little hands, and the kindness she gave without making people feel small for needing it. And the world feels quieter without that laugh in it. But perhaps lights like Dolly's never simply go out. Perhaps it changes shape. It becomes a song playing in another room, a child opening a book with their name on it, a coat made beautiful because love stitched the pieces together, and a little girl somewhere deciding that where she does not have to limit where she goes. So rest peacefully, beautiful Dolly. You are loved beyond the mountains that first heard you sing, and whenever your music finds us, a little of your light will find its way home again. And please keep Dolly's family, friends, and everybody who loved her in your thoughts. So until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep a little Dolly magic in your heart. I'll see you all again very soon.